Hi, everybody. Jill here with Illuminating Women, and it is June of 2021, and we are ending this pandemic, and we're still being safe and meeting like this, but next month we're going to have our first full get together. So this year of 2021 in Illuminating Women, we are a community that comes together with sisterhood, where we really believe in the importance of education and encouragement, because we know when women get educated and encouraged in a supportive group, we become empowered. And an empowered woman is a woman you want to just look out, because woo, there's smoke and flame and beauty and everything that goes with it. So we've been meeting together like this, and tonight, as part of the theme we've been taking on for this year is all around the issues that women are struggling with and the issues that women need that are near and dear to their heart. It may not be something you personally are going through, but who do you know? That's one of our famous lines here in Illuminating Women, because we also know we women like to help other women, and it is a ripple effect of an amazing love. So without further ado, I am thrilled. One of our Illuminating Women sisters is coming back. We had her speak on this topic a couple years ago, and I had women come out and say, I had no idea that this happened to women. I didn't know this. And when Beata starts to teach, you do feel, wow, because she's just, her stories, her art, her industry, her vocation, her heart has been what keeps Illuminating Women vibrating within each of our connections. But it's also because she does understand that educational key, how much it empowers you. So because I had so many people say, when can she come back? I need to learn more about this. This is about women's history and what she shared last time. And I remember in the room, I was watching jaws go down, and I watched women walk away going, I didn't know that. And I want my daughters to know that. I want my granddaughters. I want my nieces. I want my sisters. I want other women to know this, because I didn't know that. And now that I know that, it's going to help me have language when I need to negotiate, because part of our conversations we had earlier here in our little community was negotiating some of those things in contracts and businesses and pay raises and whatnot. So, but if you don't know where women have been, if you don't know what has gone on, how are you ever going to get there and understanding the future? Because studying history and understanding that is so important. So without further ado, I'll have Beata give more of an introduction of herself, because I always like it when it comes best from them. And but she rocks my socks off. And anytime she speaks, anytime she comes, I find myself just glued, and I walk away, and days later, I'm still processing what she says, and I just hold it near and dear to my heart. And I feel it helps me be a better person, a stronger woman. So I appreciate that. So without further ado, please welcome to our Illuminating Women Sister community tonight, Beata Baker. Thank you, Beata.
Thank you, Jill. You are always just incredibly kind and generous with your praise. I am Beata Jachulski Baker. I've had a portfolio career as an actress and a writer and an editor, and am just enjoying the heck out of life. And I am at the age of 67, I am one of the tribal elders in the Illuminating Women, and I love it. But I've been around to witness quite a bit. And so what I presented back in 2017 and what I've updated for today is really just a historical timeline. And I know that's a little dry, but historical timelines really come in handy because they let you know where you are in the space of time. And there are some things that you might think have always been, and they have not. And there are some things that you think, may have happened like during the Civil War, and they did not happen that long ago. And so this is a historical timeline. It is not editorial, it is just factual. So we're going to have Democrat thing, we're going to have Republican things, we're going to have Roe v. Wade supporters, Roe v. Wade opponents. And so none of it's editorial on my part or voices any of my personal opinions. This is just a timeline. So on the day I was born in 1954, women had only had the right to vote in this country for 34 years. I think that's staggering. And that was actually only white women as well, because women of color would have to wait another 11 years when the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, although, as we all know, that was also no sure thing. Now, I'm married to a man from Williamsburg, Virginia, and I know a lot about early history in this country because of that. And the first permanent colonist settlement on what would become American soil was Jamestown, Virginia in 1607. Now, there were no women in that first landing, but on the second landing in 1608, there were 2 women. There was Mrs. Forrest, we only know that name, Mrs. Forrest, who was joining her husband, and her 14-year-old maid, Anne Burris. Now, Anne Burris was married off to a carpenter, John Layden, 3 months after her arrival. She was 14. She was married off 3 months after she got here. And Anne Burris Layden became the first mother to give birth here in the American colonies. And the first child happened to be a girl, and she was named Virginia. So again, women arrive here in 1608. White women gain the right to vote in 1920, women of color in 1965. So this means that we were not allowed to participate in our own country's democracy for a range of 312 to 357 years. So this is going to be our little uphill timeline, and I call it a little bit of history, herstory, and also my story interspersed, because I've got a few firsts in my own lifetime that I'm just going to pepper through these. So it's 1769, and we're a new country, and the colonies, unfortunately, adopt what's called the English system. And they decree that women cannot own property in their own name or keep their own earnings. That's how we're starting off. 1777, all 13 states pass laws which actively take away women's right to vote. It ensures that women cannot vote. In spite of this less than optimistic start, in 1809, a woman named Mary Kies, Kies, becomes the first woman to receive a patent in America, and that is for a method of weaving straw with silk. 1839, in Mississippi, Mississippi becomes the first state that grants women the right to hold property in their own names, but only with the permission of their husbands. 1848, at Seneca Falls, New York, 300 women and men sign a Declaration of Sentiments, a plea for the end of discrimination against women. Nothing happens. 1866, the 14th Amendment is passed by Congress, and this addresses citizenship rights and equal protection of the laws, which was proposed primarily in response to issues related to former slaves following the American Civil War. But citizens and voters are defined as male in the Constitution. 1869, a woman named Arabella Mansfield is granted admission to practice law in Iowa, and it makes her the first woman lawyer in the United States. A woman named Ada H. Kepley becomes the first woman in the United States to graduate from law school that year, 1869. 1872, Victoria Claflin Woodhull becomes the first female presidential candidate in the United States, and she is nominated by what is called the National Radical Reformers. Also that year, 1872, female federal employees, not the private sector, federal only, those workers are guaranteed equal pay for equal work under the law. Also in 1872, Susan B. Anthony, a name that we know pretty well, casts her first vote to test whether the 14th Amendment would be interpreted broadly to guarantee women the right to vote. It did not, and she is convicted of unlawful voting. 1873, the Supreme Court rules that a state has the right to exclude a woman, a married woman, from practicing law. State. 1887, Susanna Medora Salter becomes the first woman elected mayor of an American city, and that happens to be Argonia, Kansas. 1887, oh, no, excuse me, 1890, Wyoming, who knew, becomes the first state to grant women the right to vote in all elections in that particular state. 1900, now by this year, every state has passed some sort of legislation that grants married women the right to keep their own wages and to own property in their own name. It's not a federal thing, state by state. 1916, Jeanette Rankin of Montana is the first woman to be elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. So that happened 1916. 1918, Margaret Sanger, also a person that you probably know of. 2 years after she opened a birth control clinic in Brooklyn, she won a lawsuit to allow doctors to advise her married patients about birth control for health purposes. 24 years later, that clinic, along with others, would become Planned Parenthood, and that's in 1942. 1920, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution is ratified, ensuring the right of women to vote. 1920. But again, remember, that really only meant white women. 1923, the first version, 1923, I have to say that again. The first version of an Equal Rights Amendment is introduced. It says, men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and every place subject to its jurisdiction. It fails. 1932, Hattie Wyatt Caraway of Arkansas becomes the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate. Also in 1932, the National Recovery Act forbids more than one family member from holding a government job. And so this usually means that if there's a male and a female in one family holding a government job, the woman loses her job. 1933, Frances Perkins. If you don't know her name, you should delve a little deeper and investigate her. Frances Perkins becomes the first female cabinet member in 1933. She is appointed as Secretary of Labor by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and she will be largely responsible for the creation of Social Security, unemployment insurance in the US, the federal minimum wage, and also federal laws regarding child labor. Naturally, she's accused of being a communist. Now, Frances had a very, very riveting thing happen to her that formed a lot of her opinions about life. If you've never heard of something called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire in 1911, that's another thing you should delve deeper into. It was a horrible, tragic fire that occurred in the garment district of New York. At that time, most of the labor in sweatshops, clothing shops, were young girls, teenagers, young 20s. They were locked in. It was said to prevent theft, but they were just locked in to keep them in for hours at a time. And when this horrible fire broke out, the women could not get out because at that time doors opened inward, not outward as all fire doors do now. So when you're rushing through, you can just push doors open and you can get out. So not only were the doors chained and locked, they pushed inward. And so the women could not get out of the factory. They tried to dangle from windows. It was a horrible sight. And Frances Perkins happened to be having tea with friends in Greenwich Village at that time. And the Triangle Factory fire happened in the Ash Building in the Washington Square area, not far away. So she witnessed with her own eyes that day when 146 people died, nearly all of them young women between the ages of 16 and 23. So that spurred a lot of Frances Perkins' passion for better working conditions. And it's also the reason why fire doors now always open out. Okay, now we're in 1953, and Jerry Cobb will become the first woman to undergo astronaut training. Unfortunately, NASA cancels the woman's program, astronaut training program, in 1963. 1963 happens to be the year that the Soviet Union cosmonaut program sends Valentina Tereshkova into space on the Vostok 6. It's a solo mission, so she becomes not only the first woman in space, she's the first and youngest woman in space. And it will not be until 20 years later in 1983 that the United States sends a woman into space, and that will be Sally Ride. We'll visit her again. 1963, the Pay Act is passed by Congress, promising equitable wages for the same work, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, or sex. I think that's adorable that that was passed in 1963 because it sure has not really taken hold. 1964, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act passes, and that prohibits sex discrimination in employment. The Equal Opportunity Commission is also created that year in 1964. 1965, the Supreme Court establishes the right for married couples to use contraception. 1965, I was 11. 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson signs an executive order prohibiting sex discrimination by government contractors and requiring affirmative action plans for hiring women. 1968, I am in my first year of high school. 1969, California adopts the nation's first no-fault divorce law, allowing divorce by mutual consent, and this is actually quite beneficial to a lot of women. Also in 1969, at Wellesley College, graduate Hillary Diane Rodham becomes the first student to address the graduating class on commencement. It's almost always teachers or past professors or famous people. This was the first time a student addressed the commencement class at Wellesley. And by the way, in her first year at Wellesley in 1965, Hillary was the president of the Wellesley Young Republicans. But by 1968, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and the horrors of the Vietnam War had changed her mind. She started organizing student strikers. She was working for the inclusion of Black students and faculty on campus, and she was actively campaigning for anti-war Democratic presidential candidate Eugene McCarthy. Also in 1960, excuse me, not that, but a little bit of my story in 1971. 1971, I was in high school. I was in an all-girls Catholic high school, but I did all of my acting, all of my plays at our brother's school, which was a mile away, University of Detroit Preparatory. And every year, their fantastic theater program had a one-act festival that was awarded gold medals, silver medals, bronze medals for acting. In 1971, I became the first female to ever win a gold medal for acting in this one-act play festival at an all-boys school. So that was my first little breakthrough. 1972, Title IX, you're probably familiar with that, of the Education Amendments prohibits sex discrimination in all aspects of education programs that receive federal support. This has a huge impact on women's sports in particular. Also in 1972, the Supreme Court upholds the right to use birth control by unmarried couples. At this point, I'm in my first year of college, and it's finally legal for unmarried couples to use birth control. This is 7 years after it was ruled legal for married couples to use contraception. Also in 1972, Juanita Krebs becomes the first woman director of the New York Stock Exchange. 1973, the landmark Supreme Court ruling Roe v. Wade, which makes abortion legal. In a separate ruling, the Supreme Court bans sex-segregated help wanted ads. Before 1973, it was help wanted women, help wanted men. Now, also in 1973, I have two interesting things happen to me. I'm 19 years old, and I start showing the first symptoms of Crohn's disease, which I have had ever since then. And I remember going to the doctor, to our family doctor with my mother, to try to get an upper and lower GI and to get tests. And my doctor, my male doctor, actually said to me, didn't want to give me the tests, and actually said, well, maybe you're just a nervous broad. I remember this, it's etched in my mind. And it wasn't until my little Polish mother completely nutted out on him that he consented to have me sent for the tests, which of course was positive, which found the Crohn's disease, and which he was sheepish but not apologetic about. Also in 1973, I think this is a little interesting. I'm 19 years old. I'm standing outside my Psychology of Women class, waiting for the class before me to get out. Now that other class was taught by a middle-aged man who frequently smiled and nodded and, you know, would say things to me as he was coming out with his class and I was going in with mine. And one day he says to me, "You look nice today." And I responded, "I look nice every day." And the fury that was in his eyes when I said that was an amazing lesson for me. It was very clear that he thought that that assessment belonged to him and did not belong to me. And that from that day forward, he never acknowledged me again for the rest of the semester. So 1973, teachable moment. 1974, housing discrimination on the basis of sex and credit discrimination, pay attention to that, against women is outlawed by Congress. Also in 1974, the Supreme Court rules it is illegal to force pregnant women to take maternity leave on the assumption that they are incapable of working in their physical condition. I am 20 at this point when the Supreme Court finally decides it's illegal to force women to quit their jobs when they become pregnant. 1975, the Supreme Court denies states the right to exclude women from juries. Up until then, it had been okay. Until I was 21, women could be excluded from juries. Also in 1975, one of my other little firsts, I become the first female reader at my Catholic church at Mary Queen of Heaven Parish in Detroit, Michigan. I do understand that it's primarily because they just don't have enough people who can read at both the English masses and the Polish masses, and I am bilingual, so I get my shot. And it's kind of fun because my father is a reader at this point, and so sometimes we get to read together, and that's quite lovely. 1980, Paula Hawkins of Florida, a Republican, becomes the first woman to be elected to the US Senate without following a husband or a father into the job. Up until then, it had always been the family business. Paula Hawkins is the first independent candidate to become elected to the US Senate as a woman. 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor becomes the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court. Also in 1981, the High Court finally overturned state laws that designated a husband head and master with unilateral control of property owned jointly with his wife. 1981, the states can no longer decree that men are the head and master. And also in 1981, in a break with tradition, Lady Diana Spencer, we probably all remember that wedding, deleted the vow to obey when she married Prince Charles. That definitely filled the news cycle for quite some time. 1982, the Equal Rights Amendment is proposed again. It falls short of ratification. This is 59 years after it was first introduced in 1923. 1983, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Sally K. Ride finally becomes the first American woman to be sent into space, 20 years after the Soviet Union sent Valentina Tereshkova. 1984, Geraldine Ferraro becomes the first woman to be nominated as vice president on a presidential ticket, on a major party ticket. Also in 1984, the US Supreme Court bans sex discrimination in membership for one-time all-male groups like the JCs and the Kiwanis and the Rotary clubs. I am 30 years old at this point, and up until then, I could not have been a member of the Kiwanis. Also in 1984, the state of Mississippi belatedly ratifies the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. 64 years after it passed, the state of Mississippi ratified the amendment giving us the right to vote. Okay, also in 1984, another part of my story. Now remember, we mentioned that in 1974, credit discrimination against women was outlawed by Congress. In 1984, I'm trying to get a credit card. I'm still single. I've been working at the same place for 7 years in New York. I've got a good job, good pay, but I've paid cash for everything. I've never had a credit card. I cannot get one. I apply and apply and apply, and I keep being denied. And finally, a female friend of mine tells me, don't check the gender box because it's actually illegal to ask since 1974. The boxes are still on the application, but you don't have to check it. And don't put your full name on the application, put your first initial. So I put B. Jachulski, and I don't check the gender box. And I finally get a credit card at the age of 30. And it was from Lord & Taylor, and I will be forever grateful to them for starting my credit history. 1985, Emily's List is founded with a mission to elect democratic pro-choice rights women to office. 1986, the US Supreme Court held that a work environment can be declared hostile or abusive because of discrimination based on sex, which is an important tool in sexual harassment cases. This doesn't happen until 1986. And actually, after that year, we start seeing the beginning of the chipping away of the Roe v. Wade amendment. In 1989, the Supreme Court affirms the right of states to deny public funding for abortions and to prohibit public hospitals from performing terminations. 1992, this is called the Year of the Woman. There are so many years that have been called the Year of the Woman. Following the 1991 hearings in which lawyer Anita Hill accused Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment, record number of women are elected to Congress, but this record number means 4 women winning Senate elections and 24 elected to their first terms in the House. Also in 1992, Planned Parenthood of Southern Pennsylvania versus Casey. That's a Supreme Court case, and it upholds Roe v. Wade, but it also allows individual states to impose restrictions, such as a waiting period or parental consent for minors. 1994, the Violence Against Women Act funds services for victims of rape and domestic violence and allows women to seek civil rights remedies for gender-related crimes. 1994, I'm 40 years old. 6 years later, the Supreme Court invalidates those portions of the law permitting victims of rape, domestic violence, etc., to sue their attackers in federal court. 1997, Madeleine Albright becomes the first female Secretary of State. 2005, Congress passes the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, the first law to ban a specific procedure. The Supreme Court upholds the ban the following year. 2007, Nancy Pelosi becomes the first female Speaker of the House. 2008, Alaska Governor Sarah Palin becomes the first woman to run for vice president on the Republican ticket. That same year, Hillary Clinton loses the Democratic nomination to Barack Obama. 2009, under President Barack Obama, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Restoration Act allows victims of pay discrimination, who are usually women, to finally file a complaint with the government against their employer within 180 days of their last paycheck. 2016, Hillary Rodham Clinton secures the Democratic presidential nomination, becoming the first U.S. woman to lead the ticket of a major party. 2017, Congress has a record number of women, once again, the Year of the Woman, elected with 104 female House members and 21 female senators. November 2020, Kamala Devi Harris becomes the first woman to be elected to the office of the Vice President of the United States. She is the highest ranking female official in US history, as well as the first African American and the first Asian American vice president. She assumed office this year, January 20th, 2021. We are now at June 2021, and the Equal Rights Amendment still has not been ratified 98 years after it was first introduced. So we are now into the 5th century of the existence of this American experiment, begun with that first colonial settlement in Jamestown, Virginia. Women have been here since 1608. We have been here in this land as colonists, just strictly speaking to that, for 413 years. There are still so many firsts to be achieved. So as Rabbi Tarfon from the Jewish Book of Ethics says, you are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. So as we move on in our lives, I say start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. There's still a lot of work to be done. Thank you.
Whoa, 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 whoa. We're going to stop the recording here in a minute so that we can have some of this dialogue, but to leave it with that last line from the rabbi, Beata, it's
that's one of my favorites.
We have a lot yet to do. And the more we're aware of what women have done, I gotta say, from one of the first things you talked about, which was so beautiful, that men had supported women. So it reminds us that this is done by community, and this is done by the love of everybody for level the playing field.
Yeah, that meeting in Seneca Falls in 1848, it was 300 women and men who wanted that declaration of sentiments to end discrimination against women. It didn't go anywhere, but it was a group effort. It was a community effort.
It was a community effort.
I think you're frozen, Jill. Frozen anyway.
And there was a couple other things. I was sitting there going, I was so absorbed, and I thought, Jill, you should be taking some notes. Boy, my thing is unstable. Okay, I am a little unstable. I can see my internet. I'm not unstable. My
I can make the document, the Word document available.
Oh boy, I'm stuck again. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna have Nicole's, I wanna we're gonna stop the recording because my internet's a little unstable and I'm hoping things are going through and I don't know. But Beata, I wanna thank you. This, once again, I was in like awe, and it just encourages me and it empowers me, because we gotta be the for our other sisters. We have to be the voice for the women below us, and from the rest have done. So Nicole, if you can stop the recording, thank you for joining us for GNO. This will be on our YouTube, Illuminating Women YouTube. Have a good night. The rest of us are going to stay and talk a little more. Good night, everybody, and thank you, Beata. So Nicole, go ahead.